Hello, I'm Joe Kilbride, and this is Putting the Pieces Together, an explanation of how the various elements of the Baldrige criteria can be formed into an integrated system for performance excellence. Most of you are probably familiar with the Baldrige criteria at a high level, and if so, you understand that there are 7 categories within the Baldrige criteria. Categories 1 through 6 are approach or process categories, and category 7 are results. And these categories are organized in a logical fashion. Categories 1, 2, and 3 are often referred to as the leadership triad. The concept here is that the senior leaders of an organization must set clear direction, and this direction gets embodied in strategies and plans that are focused on meeting the needs of your external customers and markets. And regardless of the industry or sector you're in, whatever your strategy is, it gets executed through skilled, motivated workforce and efficient, effective processes. Categories 5 and 6, workforce and operations, people and process, are what produce the results for your organization. And so 5, 6, and 7 are often referred to as the results triad. The foundation that connects the various elements is your measurement system. It produces the results that are reported, and those results provide feedback to leaders, and measures also help to integrate the various elements of your performance excellence system. And all of this is viewed through the context of the organizational profile, which defines the unique characteristics of an organization, its situation, its challenges, advantages, etc., that helps to customize the application of this generic framework to a particular organization. So this organizing principle, this organizing framework, these 7 categories is one way to think about the criteria. But the criteria framework are also organized in a hierarchy. When you view that hierarchy from most general to most specific, you start with the 7 categories that we just described. And then within those 7 categories, you have items. Each category includes 2 or more items. Each of these items includes somewhere between 2 to 4 areas to address. And within these items, the criteria questions are also organized into a hierarchy of the basic, overall, and multiple criteria questions. The basic being one question for each item as a whole, overall being a subset of the questions, typically the first bold-faced question in each group, and multiple are the overall plus all the remaining questions, totaling some 220 criteria questions. The overall criteria are a very important starting point for anyone looking to design or evaluate a performance excellence system. But I find that the areas to address in conjunction with these overall criteria help you to understand how the processes and approaches within the criteria can be fitted together into an integrated system for performance excellence. So the important thing is to understand that each of these individual areas to address within the criteria are important on their face, but they also represent one piece of a puzzle, one piece of a performance excellence system. And so I'd like to spend a bit of time illustrating one way to depict how these pieces might fit together to form an integrated system. So let me walk you through and build sort of a comprehensive enterprise level performance excellence system based on these various pieces. It's no surprise that the criteria require senior leaders to set clear direction and expectations for performance. This is in 1.1a in the far left of the screen. Senior leaders should also communicate that direction and get all the key stakeholders, workforce partners, etc., focused on achieving that direction. 1.2a, the governance system, is a way for typically the board of directors of an organization to oversee whether or not the leaders are making sufficient progress on achieving that direction. The direction of an organization is typically embodied through its strategies. And so the strategy development process will produce strategic objectives, clear goals with measurable, with timetables. And these goals typically translate into dashboards or scorecards so that the leaders of the organization and others can measure and monitor organizational performance, review progress, and to take the necessary steps to improve performance along the way. In order to operationalize this strategy, an organization will develop action plans and budgets to achieve those, implement strategies and achieve key goals. They'll deploy those action plans, measure progress on their achievement, and take steps to modify action plans if they're not achieving the desired results. In addition to this kind of block and tackle basics of strategic planning, there's another element to it. Strategic planning should identify a vital few key strategic opportunities for breakthrough performance and changes in the fundamental business model, perhaps, of the organization, or its product service offerings, or its way of delivering those offerings. And these vital few strategic opportunities are managed through 6.1D, the innovation management approach, which works alongside, though often separate from, other approaches to implement and improve organizational performance initiatives. The strategy development process should also help the leaders of an organization to identify its core competencies, those vital few areas where they have unique skills or expertise that allow them to create advantage relative to competitors. And in the criteria framework, the core competencies should inform the leader's decision about what things we do internally and what things we outsource to external suppliers or partners. Once the organization configures its resources appropriately, in other words, decides where are we going to focus our efforts, what are our key work processes, it's important to understand the requirements for those products and processes that the organization will deliver. And this is accomplished through various methods used to listen to the voice of the customer, also to understand what external compliance or regulatory requirements an organization might be subject to. Listening to the voice of the customer will initiate typically a market planning process, whereby you identify key customer groups or market segments, determine which of those you're going to target and pursue for business growth. You then build relationships with these and other customers, measure their satisfaction, dissatisfaction, engagement, and use this information, voice of the customer information and data, to improve organizational performance. In addition to market plans, it's not uncommon to find organizations with product plans. These product plans would identify any new or modified product service offerings, would lead to the design of work processes and potentially products themselves in order to implement those product plans. The work process will allow you to then manage the day-to-day operation of these work processes internally, as well as those key suppliers in your supply chain, and over time to improve the performance of both your products and work processes. As you're improving product and work processes in 6.1B, you can also see directly above it, there's the general operations management to manage the cost, efficiency, and effectiveness of your operations, to do all this in the most efficient manner possible. And we mentioned suppliers here. Let's recall that we said that when an organization, as part of strategy, determines its key work processes, it's also by default determining what things we're going to outsource to others. These become the key suppliers within an organization's supply chain that must be managed as well. Having developed market plans and product plans, it becomes important for an organization to assess its workforce. Do we have the capability and capacity to accomplish these plans, to achieve our strategies? So an assessment of workforce needs will identify capability and capacity gaps, perhaps. Capability gaps can be addressed through either hiring people with those skills or developing them internally through your own learning and development processes. Capacity gaps are almost always addressed through hiring processes. And regardless of how you go about addressing these needs, any changes in the capability and capacity needs of your organization, you need to prepare them for. Organize your workforce so they're able to deliver on these changing expectations. This leads you to workforce plans. So in addition to addressing specific strategic imperatives that for hiring more people or building more skills, workforce plans will also typically address how you continue to build and or sustain and reinforce your organizational culture. Often assessment and measurement of workforce engagement and the management of individual employee performance is a necessary part of this and a key focus of workforce plans and planning. Well, we mentioned earlier that voice of customer data is one of the things you're collecting. This should go into building an organizational culture that is focused on meeting the needs of your customers. Another key input to the organizational culture efforts would be the values and expectations that are established by your senior leaders in terms of what kind of an organization we're going to be, how we're going to operate. Operating in the space between process and people are your knowledge management processes. Some of these are addressed through process improvement and sharing of best practices, others through cross-training and other people management techniques. But knowledge management is an important component of this, and it's imperative within the criteria that you identify key types of knowledge, effectively manage those, and embed them within the work you do. And community support. Providing resources to support and strengthen the communities where you operate is another element of the criteria. Often these community support efforts are focused on leveraging the areas where an organization has unique competencies or knowledge that they can bring to the communities that they operate within. So there are other things that are sort of the basics that have to be addressed. So for example, shown here, any good organization is going to address the health and security of its workforce. They're going to provide benefits and policies to support the workforce. They're going to ensure the safety of workforce and a safe work operating environment. And they're going to be prepared for emergencies or disasters through things like business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and those kinds of things, and appropriate drills and other things to make sure they're prepared for those kinds of contingencies. An organization must also address information systems security and cybersecurity. This is helpful for purposes of business continuity planning, but it's also helpful on the day-to-day because it's the data and information that's managed through information systems that informs and populates the scorecards that are used to measure and review organizational performance. So these are the various elements of a performance excellence system, and it shows how they can work together, the different pieces and parts work together. You can kind of divide these up into 4 broad chunks and think about these in terms of an enterprise level PDCA, or Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is perhaps the most universally well-known way of thinking about continuous improvement. A number of these processes that are identified here are about planning and setting direction. Still others are about doing, deploying those plans, communicating that direction, actually designing your processes. And a number of these are the help to check measures and reviews and assessment of performance. And still more are more on the act side, what taking appropriate actions based upon these reviews of performance, and modifying plans, making improvements, etc. So you can think of the various elements of the criteria as comprising an enterprise level PDCA. And the results in category 7 layer right into these different areas. So 7.1 results are typically associated with products, processes, and supply chain. 7.2 associated with measures of customer satisfaction, dissatisfaction, engagement. 7.3 are where all your workforce results would be found, as well as community support. 7.5 is where your financial and market results operate or are reported. So choosing to see the criteria as a collection of systems is a very effective and useful thing. Rather than looking at 220 individual questions, it's helpful to view the criteria as a collection of key systems. World-class organizations all have strategic planning processes for measuring customer satisfaction, for managing the performance of individual employees, for providing learning, development, training opportunities to those employees, to manage their processes and to manage their key suppliers, partners, et cetera, et cetera. So one can think of the journey to excellence as simply involving disciplined cycles of improvement to design, deploy, refine, and integrate these various key systems over time. In the criteria, we refer to these cycles in terms of ADLI, which is the criteria's scoring guidelines, essentially a modified version of PDCA, but essentially the concept here is for each of these key systems, you get an approach, systematic, effective approach. You deploy that approach. You then use data to evaluate and improve and learn how to improve that approach. And then you integrate all these different approaches over time into the kind of system I showed you on the prior slide. So these discipline cycles of ADLI, approach, deployment, learning, and integration, applied to each individual system and the portfolio of systems as a whole, is how one over time completes the journey to create, achieve, and sustain an integrated performance excellence system. Thinking in terms of an integrated system can accelerate the journey to excellence. It's a useful way to think about it, whether you're an organization who's beginning to design their own customized operating model based on the Baldrige criteria, or an examiner who's looking to evaluate an organization and provide feedback on the maturity of its system. I hope you found this useful, and good luck on your journey.